2013. We're going to be focusing today on ways to hack ePublisher, bend it to your will. And the goal here is to give you enough background to where you can take what we give you out of box and do something unique and useful with it. Our agenda today, we're going to spend most of our time going through the ePublisher information. We'll follow up at the end with a little bit of information on survey results and also remind you of our webinar schedules. So, ePublisher Hacking Primer. I asked some questions when you signed up so I could get a feel for what you know about ePublisher already. So here's what we saw when you did that. We've got some simple kind of high-level stuff, starting with just creating an image creating overrides so you can customize an image. Then going on to modifying page templates, and then getting to more advanced versions of those, modifying XSL, extending parts of the ePublisher UI, finally starting to create or modify formats, and ultimately just doing something, maybe doing something in the Didache adapter with custom processing there. So you can see as we go down that line, of course there's less and less experience showing up, which is fine. Just knowing this though does give me a good idea of where to start you, and you'll see, hopefully when you come away today at the end of this session, you'll be able to go and experiment a little bit more with ePublisher and have more fun with it. I also asked for some goals, and this is what you voted up. One of them was trying to understand, primary one was trying to understand how to extend the ePublisher style designer and target settings with new controls. Also wanted to know how to leverage existing format capabilities. The question has come up several times, okay, where are you doing that? Because if you can tell me where you're doing that, I can add more to it. So I'll try today to give you an intro to some of those topics so you can start to leverage what's already there in the product. The third item that came up was trying to restructure these documents during conversion. We'll see how far we get on these. Main goal is that to answer these questions, we'll need to actually go over some background. Sorry, there's one more. Somebody filled in the blank. They'd like to know how to make their own plain text format, part of the ePublisher ecosystem. We have tutorials and some other webinars that talk about how you can do this from scratch, building formats from scratch. We're going to combine kind of those concepts with what we're doing today so you can identify where to come into ePublisher to make it more unique for your environment. I will point out there is a Power Hour session from October 2010 on building custom formats. Information from today combined with that session should get you pretty far down the road. And of course, there's also always our study hall sessions, which are a great place to ask questions and follow up. All right, so we picked out the goals based on what you voted. And to get you there, I've got a few topics that I think we need to go over so that you'll understand and have the background information you need to make this happen. Now, our goal today is not full understanding of any of these things. We don't want to get a PhD in ePublisher formats. We want to be able to hack on them. So we just need to know high level where things live, why it is the way it is, and where can we change that. All right, so we're going to talk about what defines a format. We'll start to look at the differences between these formats. As I said, how we can start to get things in the UI and all these other bits. So to do that, we're going to pull out a tool. Now there's many tools you can use. I will recommend if you're going to hack on ePublisher, the best tool you can get is a file comparison tool. There's a number of them out there. Some are free, some are paid. Brief list. Brief list. We actually use a Araxis merge. There's also another product out there called Beyond Compare. Both of these are very nice commercial products that you can go get. Beyond Compare is actually, I like that one a lot. We've been using Araxis merge for a long time. That's what you'll see today, but those are available. There's also some other products out there. One is called Diff Merge. This one's free. It's an open source based project. You can go download that and just right away start using it. There's also, let me see, KDiff 3, and there may be another one that I'm forgetting at the moment. The point is that if you have these tools and you install them on your system and use them with ePublisher, you're going to be able to do a lot more and see a lot more and understand more about how ePublisher operates. Okay. Good point, Courtney. She also mentioned WinMerge. Good point. And what you want to know about these is that all of these tools allow for file and folder comparison. Okay? All right. So I'm not going to start off with ePublisher first. I'm actually going to go dig around down in our installation area. So if you've done this before or many years ago, if you wanted to create overrides, the files that you started with were the ones in the installation area. We've introduced some easier ways to do that directly from the ePublisher UI. But keep in mind, it's ultimately the truth, the gospel of what these formats are is defined in the installation area. And if you go in here, you're going to see whatever version of the product you have installed. There'll be a folder with that version, 2013-1. And you'll see a formats area, which will have a library of formats for you. You'll also note we keep older versions of those format libraries available to you. We do this for compatibility reasons, so that you can, if you have customizations that are specific to a particular release of the ePublisher formats, you can actually stay on that version. All right. The key part for this is that we do keep quite a bit of history around for you, and there's various ways you can use that. But just want to orient you with where we are there. So we're going to go in, though, to the 2013.1 formats and take a look at one of these. I'm going to start off with a simple one, dynamic HTML. If I open in here, if I go into this folder, the first thing I'm going to see is this thing called format.wwfmt. All right? Okay, so this basically defines the format. Every bit of processing that is done by ePublisher is defined by this file right here. If you want to add or remove additional actions, or if you want to influence in some ways, you may want to take a look at this file. Okay? There's a couple of areas that we can dig into. There's a capabilities and a task groups area. It turns out you don't really have to do too much with those. The one you're going to be interested in is pipelines. All right. And if you go into ePublisher, you'll see it's a collection of these pipelines. They have names to kind of let you know. You've probably seen these names before because they show up in the ePublisher interface when we run conversions. Let's actually go ahead and do that so we can kind of see the parallel here. Okay, make this dynamic HTML. Okay. And because I'm not too interested in what our ePublisher can, of course, process data, frame, and Word content sources, I'm just going to create a quick Word content source so we can get up and rolling here. Title, save it out, that'll be great. Okay. So you'll see here in the ePublisher log, you're seeing this thing called pre-flighting pipeline stages. We literally go through and make sure that everything checks out before we try to run the conversion. And then you see it's processing each one of these pipelines. And of course, these names are matching what we have here defined in the format. All right. Now, each of these pipelines is going to consist of one or more stages. All right. And these stages are where we actually do some work. This is where we're going to reference transforms, either in the shared transform area, or we're going to reference transforms over in the formats area. Okay? So, quick thing for you. Okay, I'm typing up a note here. It says WW transform refers to a shared transform. WW format refers to a format-specific transform. Okay? So right here we've got some information to go on. We've got it's saying there's a shared transform locale XSL and UI locale XSL. And we also have down here some format-specific ones. So what that tells me is that I should be able to go into the formats area, go into the shared area, and I'm looking in common locale. And if I open this up, you'll see that this is actually the transform that's going to get loaded, fired, and run by ePublisher. All right, we don't know what it does, but the key thing is we knew where it lived, we knew where to find it, and we knew how to get down there to it. Okay. Similarly, if we come over here, we've got transforms, let's say pages. We know that this is a format one. So we're going to go over here to the dynamic HTML, drill into transforms, and find pages there. Okay? We don't know what it does. It's okay. Main point is this is the one that's going to actually do our work for us. Okay? Leaf. All of these files are working on .wif documents. Okay? So let's do a quick aside with what Leaf was just asking. So Leaf brings up a good point. So let me show you something else that you're going to want to know if you're hacking around with ePublisher. Again, we're just getting the lay of the land. We're not getting a PhD in this. We just want to know where things live. So the first thing you want to know is that whenever I run a conversion here, I have a document. There's my docx document. We like it. I will go over to my data folder. And this data folder contains basically all the intermediate processing files that we're using. To generate your particular output may not be a one-step process. It actually usually takes several steps to get there. Okay. What ePublisher does, though, is keep a record of those steps, so that if you came in here and clicked generate again, we don't start from scratch. ePublisher can look back and say, hey, is this data still good? Can I still use it? If it can, it will. If not, it'll go ahead and regenerate whatever needs to be regenerated. The goal is it's going to do a minimal generation of the output files. Okay? So this folder, if we take a look, at the way it's structured, it relates to your project. Okay. So if you've never looked at an ePublisher project file, a WEP file, please do open them up. They're XML. Everything we do is XML. XML, XSL, all kinds of good stuff in there. So it's very open, and you're able to see a lot of stuff in there. And the first thing you're going to find when you go in here are the fact that there's a project. You can see quickly which formats are defined for the project. In this case, we've got dynamic HTML. And we also have any groups and documents that are included in the project. Okay. Now the thing you'll note is that formats have a target name. Groups have an ID. And documents have an ID. And ePublisher is going to use these in several important ways. So for example, you'll see here, if I'm in this data folder, we actually create a target, a folder just for that target's scratch data, because different targets use different intermediate files. Okay, so that target ID correlates there. The next one is we have a group. There's a top-level group. Sure enough, here at this level, this is everything at the project level. We drill in here, this is everything at the group level. Finally, we have a document ID here. It's WTLM. Sure enough, that same thing exists over here. That refers to the document level items. Okay? All right. will go ahead and I will add another target just to let you see this effect real quick. We'll add a target for Reverb. Okay, go ahead and save and flip over there, and we'll generate. Our file will reload. We've now got two formats defined. We've still only got the one group and the one document, which is okay. But if we go up to our data folder now, we now have that new folder here. Reverb is now this YRW. Okay? Project level, group level, document level. Okay? Okay. Again, the reason why this matters, we're just trying to connect the high-level pictures together of what's going on. Now, inside here, what happens? So what are our steps? So if we're processing your document, basically the first thing ePublisher does is copy it. Okay? All right, so there's three steps we're roughly going to do. We're going to copy your file. Then we're going to apply variables and conditions to it. And finally, we'll convert that document to what we call WIF. Down in your data folder, you will see the results of step 2. It will have whatever your original document name was plus WIF added on to the end. Okay, so that is the precursor to this WIF file here. All right. So for example, if you had .didamap goes to .didamap WIF goes to .wif. Okay, docx goes to docx, WIF goes to .wif, and .fm goes to .fm, WIF goes to WIF. Okay. Reason to do this, why do we want to do it? We want to make sure that what we're starting with is correct. So for example, if conditions or variables are off, or if there's images not coming out, what we're going to do is I'm going to come in here and rename this to be a docx file. And I'm going to go open Word. Okay. If I had any conditional text applied, anything hidden or shown, I should see it here and it should be correct. If it's not correct here, then it makes sense ePublisher might make a mistake downstream. But this is kind of our last stop off in whatever the original format was before ePublisher continues on. Okay? Make sense? Now, I will do an aside. I will tell you there are ways to hack your WIF generation. I'm not going to go into them deeply today, but I will tell you that they're there. Okay, so there's three ones we work with. FrameMaker, there's an XSL Transform, handles final rendering to WIF. For Word, docx, and then finally, let's see, Didache. Okay, so for FrameMaker, there is an XSL transform you can play around with. It may help you to make changes in there. It handles the final conversion to WIF. For Word docx, there is also one. And then for Didache itself. Didache is actually, its entire process is XSL based. The caveat around these though is yes, you can make changes to them, but they don't have the same, they're not treated as formats, and they don't have some of the override niceties that you get to have with ePublisher formats. Okay. You can make changes to them though. And these are found down in the adapters area. Go drill in the support folder for FrameMaker. You'll see there's a number of transforms that are used that handle a final rendering to FrameMaker. It's taking basically an XML version of MIF and translating that to our WIF content. And then for Word, there's a single XSL Transform generate WIF. These can potentially be overridden in the project, but usually what you'd want to do is make these in the installed area, the application area. As I said, we'll do this for support cases primarily, and it's just a byproduct of how we develop this. It's not necessarily the most supported thing, but again, we're hacking on ePublisher today. So if you want to do it, that's where you can pull the switch. For XML, for Didache, it is quite a bit more supported because this area, we do realize people are customizing this. We have some other ways for you to control this. So there's ways to configure your default Didache style catalogs. And then there's a combination of ant commands, build batch files, and transforms along with ePublisher specific transforms, all of which are used to get you from Didache over to our WIF intermediate. All right. You can go around and play around in these. It's not uncommon to have customizations to the Didache transforms. The Word and Frame generally end up being bug fixes if there's a problem there. Okay. Okay. So that's our little aside. So we've got our copy, we've got our applied variables and conditions, and then we convert it to WIF. And I just showed you how we go from each of these extension types to get through. It's still with me. Okay, great. All right, so I'm going to restate. My kids always give me grief for this, but let's see. Okay, so we got the project file. We know how that works. Because of the project file and the way it's set up, we know how the data folder is set up. That's really good. And we understand that the data folder is segmented into the target, project level for the target, group level for the target, and document for the target. We also know how to locate where these transforms live because we know about WA transform and WA format. Great. We're on our way. So let's come back, though, to this format WWFMT. And let's come to this broader issue of the question often comes up, hey, where is something getting processed? Let's say you want to make a change to your TOC. Okay. TOC, index, what have you. The first thing you usually want to find out is this something that's generic to all the ePublisher formats, or is this something specific to the one that I'm generating? And when you ask that question, you want to figure out, okay, let's say take the example, for example, CSS. I could say, hey, a CSS change is specific to dynamic HTML. That makes sense. But really, if I think about it a little more, there are other formats that use CSS in them. Reverb uses CSS. WebWorks Help uses CSS. Oracle Help uses CSS. So maybe perhaps there's more than one location. There might be some shared transforms that are getting used here. So what we're going to do is find out quickly how much is shared. All I'm going to do is drop over dynamic HTML, and I'm going to compare that to Reverb. All right, so there's a couple of things that show up. Capabilities are a little different. These have to do with merge hierarchies and titles. Won't go too much into that. That's fine. And then we have some task groups, additional entry point for Reverb. That's fine. No big deal. But here's the interesting part. Let's go into the pipelines area. Locale is processed the same. Company info, processed the same. CSS, processed the same. Document behaviors, pretty much the same. The only difference is, though, that we have this change to whether or not it supports pop-ups or not. And I have a thing here saying that actually in this case Reverb should not be showing true for that. It should be showing false. Presently Reverb does not support pop-ups. But that's okay. What we're seeing though is that there's this one behaviors document XSL. We're using the same transform, we're just passing different parameters to it, which is kind of nice. It means that we can actually change the behavior of the format here at this level with these parameters. Let's go on down, we get document splits, and we start talking about, well, what do these things mean? So let's think about that. Let's go through this. The locale area, what it's going to do is that when you generate output, ePublisher assumes you're generating for a particular locale. It could be English, French, German, Japanese, whatever else we have defined. So what we'd like for you to do is we're going to go and get our list of strings and localization settings ready to go. Okay? So if you were to look at dynamic HTML output, not too interesting, but we have this label up here that says table of contents. Where did that come from? Well, it came from our locale information, and it came from that first step. You said we wanted to use English, that's the default, and so it's going to use a label of table of contents. Index, same thing. Okay. So right away, we just set and figured out those things. There's also one for the UI locale, basically determining on which user interface localization you're using, because what you're generating for may be German, but your user interface may be running English. So we need to show you different messages depending on which of those we're running at the time. Company info, this is basically preparing some initial, it's actually just pulling in the, it's called an FTI file. We'll talk more about that in a bit. What that does is it actually goes in here and gives you, under target settings, a way to fill out some basic company information in the target designer, in the target settings menu, dialog, excuse me. Okay. Okay, so we're going on down. Next part is we're getting into some document behaviors, document splits. Now these are oddly named, but let me give you a little more detail or background. What these are doing is they're trying to find out things about drop-downs and pop-ups and any kind of page break priorities that you might have set in your content. Okay, so if you go and you do a drop-down start or end marker, or you use paragraph styles or whatever else, we need to extract that information and keep track of it. Okay. Now, this is a good place for us to take a look at what's starting to happen. We know which transform is being used for this. And then there's this next part. Now this is a convention. There's no rule that says this has to be this way, but every single format we ship works this way. So it's just about as good as a rule. When we process these documents, we will usually identify a type that we depend on. In this case, engine width. Engine width corresponds to that source document that we're processing. So you'll see lots of things depend on engine width. So what I'm reading here is it says, hey, I've got this is going to process something. Hey, big hint, it's processing at the document level. It's going to pull in all my width documents, and it's going to output a behaviors document. Okay? Let's go take a look at this down here. I'm in my data area. I'm looking at a WIF file. And what we do is if we have a type, we just use a programmatic way to convert that to an XML name. And if you come up here, you'll see behaviors underscore document.xml. So here's a big hacking trick. Sometimes you can just kind of take a look at what your format is in some of these files and pick through them. See what's inside of them. Find out if there's anything you care about or you think is interesting. If the answer you need sitting in one of them, great. Now you've you at least know it's being computed, or you know where it's handy to get to. If not, obviously we can work on the next problem of trying to figure out how to get down there. But in this case, if we take a look at it, what we'll see is we see a list of paragraphs, and we see things like their position, split priority, drop down, and pop up. So that's kind of what we thought it was doing. It's figuring out which ones are pop-ups and drop downs. I'll take a look at this WIF file real quick. It's the only downside here, they're side by side, but we've got this DEA, the CEA, and the BEA. And sure enough, there's our DEA, CEA, and BEA. Okay? So this pattern where we're making little side index files that tell us about what's in a document so we can do other operations on them, you'll see this again over and over in ePublisher. And that's why there's a lot of shared transforms among the formats. Okay? And so what we're doing in each one of these steps and these stages is building up toward a particular answer. Okay? Trying to make sure we all have this makes sense how we're relating these two. If I continue on, I'll start to see pipelines can depend on each other. So document splits depends on document behaviors. Basically, once I know what my behaviors are, I can then go in and perform. I can assign basically my split priorities to things. And split priorities are, does this start a new document or not? Does this create a new page or not? All right. We'll make this a little more interesting in our document. All right, so we'll save those. And I'm going to go ahead and give a heading 1 designation. And because of Word's defaults, these I can scan those. And what I'll get is a heading 1. And if I go ahead and generate this, we'll get an update, and now we're getting additional paragraphs, and we'll start to see changes to document position, but also these split priorities. And we see that, hey, there's a split. The user has requested this create a new file. Okay? And sure enough, in our output, we get these different groups. We even get some TOC level information. Now, the thing to keep in mind when hacking on ePublisher, you're going to be looking for small changes that add up. There's 2 reasons for this. One, it actually is easier to do that than it is to make a very complicated thing. If you can break it down into smaller chunks, do so. It's easy to do. There's a reason why ePublisher defines pipelines and the stages. You'll probably think about solving an entire problem at the pipeline level, but you'll solve individual parts of it using small stages, just small transformational steps to get you where you want to go. Okay? So that's the first reason to think about doing it that way. A little bit this is guided by XSL, but there's another very important consideration. It's actually faster. It's kind of hard to imagine how it could be, but there's kind of this idea in XSL and some of the processing that the way it operates is in a stream-oriented fashion. Okay, if you imagine a stream flowing downriver, if you wanted to put the stream to make it go to 6 locations, one option is to try and take buckets of water and move the water as it's flowing to each of the locations you want it to go to. That's not going to work very well. What works a lot better is if you think in terms of, well, I'll just divide the flow. And if you're restricted to where you can only divide the flow at one place at a time, then you say, okay, well, I'll go upstream about half mile. I'll cut the river in half. Now I've got two individual things. Now I'll come back and I'll divide that again, and I'll do whatever it is I need to do to solve my problem. If someone else comes along, like, well, you wanted to split this into 6 different things, why didn't you just do it all at once? You're like, yeah, makes sense, but this actually worked out for me to be better because of the way that it works and the nature of it. So when you are working with XSL and this kind of idea of a data stream flow, you are going to think about, hey, let me break this out. And we're already seeing that here. Some of these we literally just came in and decorated on split priorities. All right, let's get back over here to our format. Looks like I accidentally closed that. Just reopen. Okay. Oh, I know where I'm at. Sorry, I apologize. Okay, so we've got the document behaviors, we've got drop-downs, we've got splits starting to come in, and then we start to get into more common behaviors. Now, one of the things that occurs with these behaviors, for example, is that they're raw. If I have 20 paragraphs say, I end a pop-up, that may or may not be right. So there has to be some validation. Was there a pop-up open? Was there not a pop-up open? We have to know if that's actually the case. Same thing with drop-downs. So these behavior steps are actually going to go through and give us the answer, the final answer as to what this is. And we can use our cheats as before. Behavior splits goes to behaviors finalize. Hey, let's go take a look. What does that look like? We get this really cool thing happening, too, that now we don't just have our paragraphs by themselves. They're actually in these little split containers, which are going to correspond to our generated pages. Now we know what's the document position to start at for this split, and we know which paragraphs are supposed to appear in it. Okay? In this case, we don't have any drop-downs, so we're not seeing any other information. But if it was there, this is where we could see it. All right, so let's continue on for this. Baggage files. This is going to be any additional files that our content references, right? If we have a file and it says, hey, I'm referencing this image over here and I just want it to go along for the ride, we're going to consider that baggage file. We'll bring it along for the ride. These are the files that start to take care of this operations. Image types, we want to figure out, hey, what's valid for this particular format, okay? And we're going to see some examples where we'll see this in we'll start to see some things where we're using some of these FTI files, which we'll talk about in a moment, to give us information about what we should do, what's valid for the format. To give an example, the classic one would be WinHelp. WinHelp supported BMP files. That's what it supported. You couldn't give it, for example, PNG. It doesn't know what to do with the PNG file. But it does know how to handle BMP files. So that's pretty important to know when we're processing. If we have a bunch of PNGs, we're going to have to do some work to get them to the right format. So these are some of the things that help us know that. Okay. So then coming down, we're coming into splits. This is where we're actually going to figure out naming information. So if you're hacking around on ePublisher, and Leaf was this past week, he was trying to control where file names were defined, file name markers. Turns out what we're going to do is the same pattern we've been doing. First thing we're going to do is get raw name info. Then we're going to pull it up to the group level. Then we're going to make sure that those things are unique. Next bit is we will ask the format, hey, I've got the files that I figured out based on the generic file splits and the source document you provided. Is there anything else you want to tell me about? And this is a case where it'll come back over into the format, into the files area, and say, yeah, what have you got? So in the case of, say, WebWorks Reverb, we have a lot of additional things. We have splash pages, and we have the connect page, and we may have some search pages and other things that are showing up. We're going to give a chance for the format to do something with those files and change them in some way. Okay. Once we've got that, if we've got PDF files, we'll bring them in. Last steps are going to be making things unique. And then if we do have any project level files, we'll go ahead and emit those as well. Reverb has some project level files. Dynamic HTML does not. Going on down, we've got copying. This is going to be copying anything that we've identified. If you want to see what gets copied, let's go take a look. We can actually look at splits, unique names. Let's come up here. All right, got splits, unique names. And it says whatever we generate is going to be called a copy baggage file, and the split file type is baggage. So I don't think we have any of those in here. If it came in, you see that there are types associated with all these files. We've got CSS files, got an index file, we've got split files that are generated, we've got images that are coming along. Those are of type copy. Hey, that makes sense. Hey, there's a split file type of copy. This thing is going to find everything in here with a copy type and copy it to our output folder for us. All right, so if we want stuff to go along for the ride, hey, this might be a good place to look in here to see how we can, you know, on the one hand, we can copy files ourselves, which is fine. The other way to think about it is this transform's already going to copy stuff for us. Let's go upstream and figure out how to add what we want to the list of files it's going to copy for us. If we do that, then we get all the benefits of whatever it's going to do to make things unique and put them in the right place and so on. Okay? Okay, next part's links. Leaf was trying to do something with some of his file names, or maybe with some named anchors, things like that. If you want to play games with those, where do you go look? You go look here in links. You'll see that pretty much these links are handled the same way for all of our formats. If you don't like where something points to, or you'd like to change it, you might take a look at the links area and look at what data it's tracking. For this guy, we come in here. Let's take a look. His final output, he's going to pull stuff from the document. He'll get unique links for the document. He'll roll them up to the group, and then he'll roll them up to the project. And he's going to leave us with links project. So up here we have links project. And what we can see here is we know, hey, there's 3 files. We know that this is the document they came from. We also know what the output path is for this file, because you kind of have to know that to resolve your links. So it's going to go power hour 1.1, this is 1.2, this is 1.3. Apologize, it keeps jumping on me. And we know the titles for those things too. We've already extracted all that information. All right. And then within those, we know, hey, these are the paragraphs that appear. What link ID should be used? Because link ID may be different from the ID, and we know whether or not it's the first link in the document or not. Okay? So, seems kind of straightforward in a way, but these are little bits and pieces of information we're acquiring so that we can do our final transforms. Okay. So on the one hand, I'm going through a lot of details here. The reason I'm doing it, though, is to get you to see this pattern of it's the same pattern over and over. This transform, there's the data file, here's what I get. There's the transform, there's the data file. So is this making sense to everyone? take it as yes for now. What I'm going to start doing here now is, let's just again sit back now. Now that we've gone through some of these in detail, let's look at this high level. We got dynamic HTML on the left, we've got Reverb on the right. Very different outputs in terms of user experience. Correct, Leaf. The fact that you're thinking about looking at what's upstream to hack is key. That's the way to think about it. So here's Reverb. Again, different presentation, different capabilities, features, search. But at the end of the day, both of these are using very similar markup entries. Their document behaviors are almost identical. Splits, behaviors, baggage. Splits handling is a little different. And the big difference is occurring at the format level. Dynamic HTML doesn't have to do as much with its files. Copying is the same, links are the same, variables are the same. There's a splash page. That makes sense. Reverb has a splash page. Now here's some of the ones too where we start to get higher level, and another place if you want to game things where you want to think about doing it. These boil down in the TSC and index areas. Look at these and you'll note that the first 6 stages are identical. In fact, in all of our formats, the first 6 stages of the TSC are the same. We do the same operations to calculate it. So if you want to go and change how your TSC appears, you can do it at the format level. Format transforms TSC. But think about what you're doing. Are you really trying to restructure the TSC? If you are, maybe you want to not do it at the format level. Maybe it's too late. Maybe it's kind of like Niagara Falls. You've already gone over the edge and you can't get back up. Come back up here and take a look. We're pulling document level data here. We're joining things together. We're figuring out the hierarchy. We're nesting things so that they appear as they should, and we're applying maybe a collapse operation. Maybe there's gaps in your TSC levels. We have to do something about that. Okay, let's do that. Finally, we have to actually resolve. Where do these TSC level items point to? So we're going to have to figure out where those links resolve to. Okay. You can see some neat results from this. The Tok Resolve here. If I can get myself to the right location. You're going to see the entries. They tell us what document they came from. There's those document IDs again. They tell us where in the document it occurs, the level. Tell us where the link is, what the link ID to use is. We even have a whole snapshot of the paragraph text itself. Okay, this is taken straight from the WIF. We just copy the sucker on over so that we have it. All right. So pretty neat stuff. Pretty easy to just pull that on and bring it with us. Okay. Okay. All right. So Tok level. Problem being solved is I want to make a Tok. That's why the pipeline's named Tok. Here's the individual steps to get us there. The last one usually being generating that TSC level. Reverb's a little different, but we'll go into that in a moment. Next one is the pipeline for index. Again, same deal. We're going to pull all this in, do the same operations. The last bit is going to be taking our fully resolved index and then doing something with it. All this markup you're looking at basically says, hey, take all my index resolve items, pull in this other data and generate me an index output file, that's what I'd like for you to do, please. Okay. For styles, styles are actually the same. These are generating CSS styles. Okay, if you want to go and change how your CSS catalog is written, this is the place to go. Transform styles. Reverb has a requirement for an IE7 one, so you'll see that there. Images are the same. They're the same. There was an entry we saw a little earlier where we asked about what are valid file formats. We've actually recorded that data, and with that information we now know which ones to process. So we're good to go. Pages. Pages do have some transforms. I'm going to come back to pages. They are a little more complicated than just the format file. The entry point for page generation is always in the format. But what you'll see is that pages do an in, out, in kind of trick. And I'll show you how that works. The key point, though, is that the entry point for that page generation is sitting here. The prime file it's depending on is the engine WIF. It's depending on that WIF document that you're processing. Okay. PDFs, these are using the classic PDF, so this is usually deferring to however this defers to FrameMaker or to Word or to Didache to use their built-in PDF production capabilities. That's available in all the formats. PDF XSL FO, obviously that's a different route to use, and you can also make use of that. That one's a format for us. This one's kind of just our generic if you're using their capabilities for production. Reverb has a connect area. This is for doing the initial entry pages and a search page. If you're doing client-side search, we're going to need to create some indexes. A lot of the reports are the same. Report topics are the same. There's, of course, topic sensitivity support in Reverb, and this is where you can get some information about how that works. Okay. I'll do one more here just to kind of show for WebWorks help. Actually, I'm going to show Microsoft HTML help. Differences up top. Some of the help formats start to look a lot alike. We got some pop-up data. There's some additional files data that's specific to CHUM. And merge pages, things like this. So as you go through this, you see that small differences and then a lot that's the same. HTML help does support pop-ups, so you'll see the pop-up stage included in it. That's actually the same one that we use for WebWorks help. So anyway, I'll move away from this for a moment and let's talk about a couple of these files that we were just looking at. Okay. We're still trying to hack on stuff. Let's say we wanted to hack on our pages. There's 3 page types that you need to know about. Okay, here they are. They are pop-ups. So if you have pop-up content where a user hovers or clicks on a link and then it displays a pop-up, that content is generated via popups.xsl. The next one is wrappers.xsl. Possibly poorly named, but its main goal is it places a small wrapper file around an image. Long ago, once upon a time, if you had a link to an image, we just show you the image. That works great in browsers. It does not work well in WinHelp. WinHelp requires that everything have a RTF wouldn't help wrapper around it. And when we discovered that, we kind of realized, well, you know, really all images should have a page wrapped around them. We shouldn't just show you the raw image file itself. So what happens here is that if you have any images that are going to be that have thumbnails, and then we're generating a larger image for it, we're going to have wrappers go and process that data. Okay. And then the next one is, of course, your page content itself. So if you're going to generate those pages, this is where those pages come in. All right. Now these three are special because all three of them will give a reference to a page template. You'll note that right now these all use the same page template, which is both a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing in that there's only one. It's a curse in that that one becomes more complicated because it's trying to serve three different purposes. It's trying to work as a pop-up, it's trying to work as a page content, and it's trying to work as an image wrapper. In some of those cases, you want navigation controls or not. You want all kinds of varying things. So one of the things you can do, though, is go and make your own. You could say, I want to have a new page template. I'll just do this here. We'll ignore that entry. I could say, I'm going to have one for wrappers. Sure, I'll just do that. And I can go here to my wrappers and say, okay, my wrappers will now use wrappers.asp. Done. I can now go in here and change this to whatever I want. I can strip stuff out that I don't want or need and cut it down to size. Now, the reason why we need to know about those entry points is this. Pages, wrappers, and pop-ups all have a similar structure. There's some setup up top, which you can get into details if you want a PhD. Ultimately, though, they have a template called page that's, amazingly enough, going to process page. Wrappers have a template called wrapper, and pop-ups have a pop-up called pop-up. Each of these guys will come in and they will do a deal where they will define things like your conditions. We do this by setting a www page condition. And all of these guys do pretty much the same thing. They set a condition. We actually usually do an initial set of conditions, and then we do our final set, because some we can't know until we set them the first time. For example, is there any company info? I don't know. Let's dump it out. If there's company info and we get a yes, then we'll say yes, there's company info. If not, then we won't. So depending on whether we have a header or footer depends on what shows up. All right. So you're going to see the same structure over here. Initial conditions. There we go. Pop-ups, same deal. Let's come down here. Okay, so we've got our initial condition set. Next thing we're going to do is set our replacements. So if you're looking at page templates, this is any of the content that we're pushing into the page itself. Mark of the web, you can have the WebWorks root file, all kinds of different things. But we're going to do a set of replacements. Okay, and then our last bit is going to be pretty much, we're going to set a mapping content for some character mapping. Won't go too much into that right now. And then finally, though, we just pretty much call the page template. There's a template that you can invoke and say, hey, go process my page template. I got all the replacements and conditions set. Go do your thing. That's what this does. And you're going to see wrappers does the same thing, and pop-ups does the same thing. And the last part is just a little bit of bookkeeping to make sure we all know what's happening and that ePublisher is informed about these changes. Okay. So pages, wrappers, and pop-ups are all almost identical. Obviously, they're setting different values. How do they get here? What happens is in this entry point here, before we call our template page, before we call our template wrapper, before we call our template pop-up, we're going to pull in a shared transform. Because here's the deal. All three of these operations are the same regardless of the format. If you go up here, you're going to see an entry called Transforms Common Pages Popups. If you go up here, we're including one called there's the page template. Come back here. Common Pages XSL. Wrappers is actually in Common Images Wrappers. Okay? And if you're really interested, what these things do is a very important piece. They pull in a lot of data and they break up your content and figure out, hey, you had all these splits. They got to segment the content that you're working with and then hand it off to you so you can process it. So what this guy's going to do is do all that work, set it all up, do a bunch of other stuff for you, a lot of bookkeeping, and then at the end of the day when he's done, he's going to call the template page, which is going to pop you right back over into your pages transform. All right? So documents, you go into pages, then it calls the documents pages, which calls back over to you at page. All right? And then there's the last final bit. Okay, so if you're following along that in the chat, you'll see that we started in pages, we bounce back over to shared, then we come back into pages again after it's segmented all the content for us, and our last bit is to actually get the content. The content's going to be processed the same regardless of whether it's in pop-ups or images or however we do it, largely the same. And so the way we handle that is there is a single content XSL. And this guy is going to handle all of your markup for the page. All right? So if you go in here, you got breadcrumbs, you got content, and if you ever ask this question, you always say, hey, how come everything involves an overrided content XSL? Well, this is the reason why. Most of your content comes through this guy. All right? So what's the relationship here? So content XSL is the content of the page, and then pages, XSL, wrappers, and pop-ups are the top-level structure. So you need to figure out if you say, hey, I want to put a footer, I want to put a heading on the page, you're going to want to look at those page-level entries. If you want to do it per paragraph or wherever something occurs in the flow, you're going to want to check out content.xsl. Okay. Now we won't be able to get quite as far as I'd like. Obviously, we're running over, but I will show you just very quickly a little bit through Familiarity here. That just as the formats are largely shared, there's a lot of things about the HTML markups that are shared between these formats. Now I'm going to compare dynamic HTML to WebWorks Help. You start to see immediate differences, things like WA links. So WebWorks Help supports associative links, dynamic HTML does not. Here we're seeing some Reverb WebWorks Help specific things. Related topics in dynamic HTML are simple links. In WebWorks Help, there are actually some JavaScript involved and some data build-up. So there's a little difference there. That makes sense. Here we've got actually a silly difference. It doesn't even have to be there. Here we've got some escaping differences having to do with differences on how these are implemented. Here's more A-link stuff. Little different way to mark up roughly the same text there. Here's some more A-link processing. Links are resolved a little differently between the two. Here you're starting to see this. So one of the things is if you see a behavior you like in one format that you'd like to use in another, good way to do it is pull up those formats, take a look at the specific areas, think about where it's occurring, and then see if you can pull up a diff and find out, hey, maybe the code you need is already sitting there and you can pull it over. Okay. One of the things that happens is we pull out a link info. All of your formats have link info. What this is going to do is take a raw link. It'll pass it off to some common transforms. There's links resolved. There's a transform and shared area. It goes and resolves it for us based on our parameters. We say, do we allow group to group? Do we allow URLs? What do we allow? And then based on that, it will give you that info, and then you can process it and decorate titles or hrefs or target anchors or whatever it is that you need to do. Okay. More A-link fun. And this last bit, some mouse over items for pop-ups. Pretty much other than that, there's not too much different between the markup we're generating for WebWorks Help as what we're generating for Dynamic HTML. And the reason that these are distinct is so that you can have individual control over them. Sometimes it's important to have this distinction. As you can see, there are littered just enough differences that it does help the fact that we're not so tightly wired that they're a single transform being reused in different ways. But part of this is just, it's always a snapshot of where things are at the time of development, where these things occurred. Big message there is that if you're learning how to do something in one of the formats, there's a good chance you can bring that knowledge over to a different one for you. Okay. I know we're late. I do want to do one last bit here on CSS. This is a great example. Is that we will see now that there's a rule for heading 1 under the paragraphs to make the color, make it that color. In ePublisher, what we're doing over and over again is we get the rule, then we're going to resolve that rule against the document itself. Because in this case, there may be additional properties that the document provides. So let's say there's already an underline or border that the content provides, and we want to use it. This will resolve it against that item. We now have a set of resolved context properties. Our next part is we're going to translate those to CSS. Okay, they're pretty close to CSS, but there may be some different markups. So we'll say, hey, can you make sure these are valid? Now, one of the parts on this is that some of the CSS properties or some of the things defined may not be valid for our output format. ePub 2.0 is a good example. ePub has more limited CSS than full CSS systems. So what you want to do in that case is knock some things out or maybe relabel things. This step says, okay, I'm going to change that. And then finally, once we have that, we now have a set of CSS properties we can do something with. If you take a look at the styles area, we're going to use the same recipe to generate the CSS catalog. If we need to do anything specific with an element, character, or paragraph style, we're going to follow the same kind of recipe for it. Okay. Now there's details for adding or removing things from this list, but what you want to think about is, hey, if I want to introduce a property, rather than going and putting CSS markup myself as inline, maybe all I need to do is come in here and decorate in a new project property. Maybe I can just say, hey, but whatever I like here, all right? And just by doing that, it's suddenly going to pick up and use ePublisher's machinery to do this. This can also be important if you're working with things like simple HTML. If you happen to do that where you're going to a different markup, we're using the same properties markup throughout. If you're going to WinHelp, you probably don't recall the RTF markup required to do font colors. Maybe you do, I don't. The other option is in terms of things like PDF XSLFO. We actually have some routines there that will take those properties and translate them for you and give you a bucket of properties to go and dump onto the element you're working with. You don't have to think about it. All you have to know about is how is ePublisher representing that style information, and how can I add to it and let it do its thing. And that's part of what's happening here. Okay, so topics, I'm going to come back. Been going on a while. We need to close out. What defines a format? You know what that is now. How do we compare them? Get a diff tool, bring them up. You can find out what's the same and what's different. Look for those things and think about where in the stream you want to make your changes. We didn't go over enabling the UI control over format features. There are actually some webinars on that. If you take a look at the Power Archive, referred to as FTI, Format Trade Info. CSS hacks, we did just touch upon that briefly on how you can use some of the information and leverage ePublisher's machinery to help you with that. Markup, pretty much I've gotten you down to where the content's being emitted. We can go over those details, but I think you know where to start looking for some of that. So if we take a look at our goals, if we're trying to understand how to extend ePublisher Style Designer and Target Settings interface, we didn't cover this as well in terms of showing you the FTI and then showing you the link between the FTI and the XSL. Part of the reason is, I said, we do have a webinar on that subject. Leveraging existing format capabilities for CSS, we just touched upon that a bit, letting you see how it's happening. And then restructuring documents during conversion. Main point on that is because of how these format files are defined, these all depend on engine width. It's possible for me to come in here and game ePublisher. I can actually change this, and then I can say, hey, ePublisher, I don't want you to use that original one. I want you to use the one I'm giving you. Okay? This gives us a hook to go and change the stream and make it swirl and make lakes out of it, do whatever we want, and we really don't have to ask permission from anyone to do it. We can just throw that in there and use as much or as little of ePublisher's default processing as we like. Okay. So that's what I have on this subject today. I know we're kind of hodgepodge. I know there'll probably be additional questions. First of all, please ask questions on WWP users, and do drop by study hall. All right. Real quickly though, for next month, want to let you know what we turned out. Survey results, we had 2 p.m. Central is still coming up as our time to meet. Voice options, voice over IP wins. This is the second month in a row it's beat out phone. The nice part is we're actually able to record both the voice over IP and the phone conversation, so we're able to do it all, which is great news. For topics, here were the topics we had posted. The one that won was Didache debugging, so that'll be our topic in August. Recommendations for future topics, there were some really nice comments. Thank you for those. We didn't get any suggestions though, so I do like to post the comments, but I also would love to get additional suggestions for what we can cover and what you'd like to learn more about. Closing out for our webinar schedule, next Power Hour is August 29th at 2 p.m. Central, so it's Didache debugging. You'll be able to sign up once we get those posted. The Show Me session, this is for anyone learning about ePublisher or new to it. The next one is on August 15th at 10:30 a.m. Central. And finally, there's Study Hall. This is run by Senior Developer Jesse Wiles. We'll be hanging out for office hours on July 31st at 1 p.m. That's what I have today. I really appreciate you guys joining me and staying through.